This is Steven Seagal, a man who doesn't just fight. He becomes the fight. Calm, unassuming, almost invisible in his quiet demeanor. But cross him, and you awaken a predator. It all started in Los Angeles, a city where danger lurks in every shadow, and power is claimed not by wealth, but by fear. Steven had arrived for a simple purpose, a favor for a friend, a negotiation that should have been straightforward. But Los Angeles doesn't allow simplicity, and some of the wrong people had already noticed him. The night was thick and humid, the asphalt glowing under the dim streetlights. Steven walked along a narrow alley, his leather jacket brushing lightly against his arm, his eyes scanning every corner, every reflection, every movement. Two black sedans slid into the alley, their tires squealing softly. From them, a group of men emerged, heavily tattooed, each one radiating danger, their movements confident as if the city belonged to them. "Hey, who's this guy?" one sneered. He was large, scarred, his hands built for breaking bones. "You don't belong around here, old man." Steven didn't respond. He didn't flinch. His hands remained relaxed at his sides, his posture calm, almost bored. Yet his eyes, cold, calculating, took in every detail. The men laughed. "Passing through? You're walking through my hood, buddy. Time to learn some respect." One of them stepped closer, cracking his knuckles. "Get off the street, or we'll make sure you regret it." Steven tilted his head slightly. "I'm just passing through," he said, his voice low, steady. The laughter grew louder. They were confident, foolishly so. They didn't know the storm they had just stirred. They lunged. In the blink of an eye, Steven moved. Not fast, inhumanly fast. A single punch shattered the first man's jaw. Another elbow sent the second crashing against the wall. The remaining men froze. Fear flickered across their faces. They had awakened something dangerous. But this was only the beginning. Steven knew the streets. He knew that brute force alone would not be enough. Within minutes, 3 more men emerged, knives in hand, circling him. "Nowhere to run, old man," one hissed. Steven's lips barely moved. "I don't run." Then, in a fluid motion, he struck. The knives never found him. Every strike was countered, every swing redirected. A kick to the chest sent one man flying into a dumpster. Another's arm was twisted in midair, shattering with a sickening crack. The final 2 attempted to flank him, but Steven anticipated it, moving with a predator's precision. By the time the last man tried to flee, Steven was already in front of him, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "Next time you think about messing with someone you don't understand," he whispered, "remember this moment." And then he vanished, leaving chaos and broken bodies behind. Word of that night spread quickly through the underworld. A man, an older, calm, silent man, had destroyed an entire gang in minutes. Some called him a legend. Others whispered his name with fear, Steven Seagal. Within days, the gang's leader, Raul El Lobo Martinez, decided to act. If Seagal was in the city, the balance of power was threatened. Raul, known for his ruthlessness and cunning, ordered, "Find him. Bring him to me. I want to see what makes him tick, and break him if I have to." Steven, however, never hid. He had no interest in power or territory. His mission was personal, precise, and deliberate. But Los Angeles is unforgiving, and the city itself seemed to conspire against him. Late one night, as Steven left a local diner, a black SUV cut him off. Tires screeched, doors flew open, and 5 men jumped out, armed with chains and bats, their shouts echoing off the walls. They assumed they had the advantage. A man alone, seemingly old, and completely unarmed. Steven didn't flinch. He adjusted his stance lightly, letting the tension stretch for a single heartbeat. Then, the storm broke. In an instant, one attacker was on the ground, kicked with precision. Another was lifted and slammed onto the hood of the SUV. The chains barely brushed him before he twisted the first attacker midair, sending him crashing into the concrete. The rest tried to coordinate, but Steven's awareness was unmatched. Every movement, every angle, every intention, he saw it all. By the end, the SUV was dented and scarred, the men either unconscious or screaming as they fled. Steven walked away, silent, unbroken, leaving behind only devastation. Raul, enraged, brought in reinforcements. Mercenaries, ex-military, trained killers from across the city. They tracked Steven, setting up ambushes, believing numbers and skill could overpower him. But they underestimated his ability to anticipate, to read the intentions of every opponent like an open book. The next encounter occurred in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Dozens of men surrounded him, armed with guns, knives, and confidence. Raul stepped forward. "You don't belong here," he said. "Not in my city, not in my territory. You've caused enough trouble." Steven didn't reply. His presence alone was enough to unsettle them. Raul's men hesitated. Seconds of doubt can mean death in a fight. Then it began. The first man fired a gun. Before the bullet left the chamber, Steven moved. The shooter was disarmed mid-action, crashing to the ground. Another lunged with a knife. Steven grabbed it, twisted the attacker's wrist, and sent him collapsing in pain. The remaining men tried to coordinate, but each move was anticipated, each strike neutralized. Within minutes, the attackers were either unconscious or incapacitated. Raul, watching in disbelief, could hardly comprehend the speed and precision of a man so calm. You are not human," Raul muttered. "They sent a message. Come get him if you dare." Steven arrived at the location alone. The informant was alive but terrified. Raul's men surrounded the building, waiting for the signal. But Steven moved silently, entering through a back entrance. In minutes, the mercenaries were disarmed, pinned, and incapacitated without a single fatal shot. The informant watched in disbelief as a man, seemingly calm and old, overpowered an entire squad with precision and control. Finally, Raul appeared, gun drawn, flanked by his bodyguards. But Steven did not fear them. He approached, every step measured, every breath controlled. Within moments, the gun was out of Raul's hands, his body pressed against the wall. "Your pride is your weakness," Steven said. "Learn from it." Raul, broken, understood that he had been beaten not just by strength, but by discipline, awareness, and skill. He would never challenge Steven again. By the next week, the city's underworld had learned its lesson. Stories circulated of impossible movements, precise strikes, and calm, unrelenting dominance. Men whispered about the night Steven Seagal walked through the streets of Los Angeles and reminded everyone why he was feared. Even years later, gang members who survived told the same story. Mess with Steven Seagal, and you awaken a predator. Silent, efficient, merciless when provoked, but principled, controlled, and unbeatable. Steven never sought recognition. He never needed it. But those who encountered him, even for a single night, carried the memory forever. A predator had walked among them, and no one would forget. The streets of Los Angeles would never be the same. And somewhere in the shadows, Steven Seagal continued to watch, move, and act. Always ready, always precise, always one step ahead. He is not just a fighter. He is a predator. And this is his city now. Days passed. Raul had disappeared into hiding, licking his wounds and plotting revenge. Yet the city had already shifted. Gang members whispered nervously in the streets, sharing stories of the man who could dismantle their operations without a single scratch. Steven Seagal's presence had become a force, intangible, unstoppable, a warning in every shadow. But power in Los Angeles is never dormant. A new player emerged, Hector the Viper Alvarez, a ruthless gangster with a reputation for cruelty. He saw Raul's failures and assumed the predator could be challenged. Hector assembled a team of elite enforcers, men trained to handle the deadliest fighters in the world. They believed skill and numbers could finally overcome Steven. One humid night, Steven walked along the harbor docks, unaware that Hector's team was closing in. The first man stepped forward, knife glinting under the pale moonlight. "You Seagal?" he asked mockingly. "Time to die." Steven's eyes narrowed slightly. "I didn't come here to fight tonight. But if you insist." A flurry of motion followed. Blades swung, bullets fired, but none found their target. Steven moved like water, fluid and unstoppable, neutralizing each attacker with surgical precision. A knife to the wrist, a kick to the chest, an elbow to the jaw. Within minutes, the elite enforcers were incapacitated, sprawled across the dock in a tableau of failure. Hector emerged from the shadows, handgun raised. "You're not invincible," he snarled. Steven tilted his head. "Calm. Controlled. Invincibility is an illusion. You just haven't survived long enough to understand." The final showdown had begun. Hector charged, guns swinging wildly, desperation in every movement. Steven didn't flinch. With a single step, he closed the distance, catching the barrel of the gun and twisting it until the metal groaned and bent uselessly. Hector stumbled back, stunned by the speed and power of the attack. "You think brute force will win?" Steven asked softly, his eyes cold and unyielding. "You don't understand the fight you're in." Hector lunged again, this time with a knife. Steven's hand shot out, redirecting the blade midair, and with a swift, precise motion, disarmed him. Another strike to the shoulder sent Hector sprawling to the ground, gasping for breath. Every movement Steven made was deliberate, each calculated strike leaving Hector with no chance, no control, no escape. The harbor was silent now, except for the sound of crashing waves and the ragged breathing of the defeated. Hector's men were unconscious or fleeing in terror. Raul had disappeared entirely, leaving Hector alone to face the predator. Steven stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You came here to challenge me, to prove something. But all you've proven is your arrogance and your mistake." Hector, clutching at a railing, looked up at him with a mix of fear and awe. I'll pay you. Just leave me alive," he stammered. Steven's gaze pierced through him. "Survive, yes, but only if you leave this path behind. If you continue, you will meet the same fate as the rest. Remember, the predator doesn't fight to kill. He fights to teach a lesson and ensure it is never forgotten." With that, Steven turned and walked away, the night swallowing his figure as the first rays of dawn touched the water. Word would travel fast. Hector and his men would tell their tale, spreading fear through the underworld, ensuring no one would underestimate Steven Seagal again. The city breathed a tense calm. The predator had spoken, and Los Angeles had learned. Days later, in a quiet apartment, Steven reflected on the events. He wasn't a man driven by vengeance. He sought order, discipline, and justice in a world that had long abandoned it. Yet his presence alone had shifted the balance of power, leaving a clear message. In the streets of Los Angeles, respect is earned, and threats are met with precision and unrelenting force. But even as the city whispered his name, Steven knew it wasn't over. Danger never truly sleeps in a place like this. Another gang, another threat, another challenge. These were constants. Yet he welcomed them, because he was not just a fighter. He was a predator. Silent, efficient, unstoppable. And the predator watches, always. Weeks passed. The underworld of Los Angeles was transformed. Gangs no longer moved openly in the streets. They plotted in hushed tones, double-checking every decision. Everyone knew the predator was out there, silent, watching, waiting for the slightest provocation. But Steven did not wait for challenges. He moved deliberately, maintaining vigilance, ensuring that the city remained in balance. One evening, he received word from an informant that a coalition of smaller gangs was planning to overthrow the remnants of Raul's crew. It was reckless, ambitious, and dangerous. Steven knew intervention was necessary, not out of desire, but duty. He arrived at the rendezvous point, an abandoned warehouse near the edge of the industrial district. Shadows clung to the corners, the smell of rust and oil thick in the air. Dozens of gang members gathered, confident that sheer numbers would secure victory. They were wrong. As he stepped into the open, silence fell. The gang leaders laughed nervously. "Where is he?" one muttered. "He can't be here. It's impossible." Then Steven moved. Blindingly fast, precise, efficient. The first man's arm was twisted behind his back, sending him sprawling to the ground. A kick to the chest sent another crashing into a pile of crates. Guns were drawn, knives swung, but Steven's movements were a blur. Every strike disabled, every motion anticipated, every threat neutralized. The leaders attempted to coordinate, calling out orders, pointing weapons from multiple angles. Steven adapted instantly, redirecting attacks, using the attackers' momentum against them. Within minutes, the entire warehouse was chaos. Bodies sprawled, screams echoing, weapons scattered. Finally, the last leader, a man known as Victor the Bull Ramirez, faced Steven alone. Victor was large, muscular, and arrogant, believing strength alone could topple a predator. He charged, fists swinging wildly. Steven dodged, countered, and in one swift motion, forced Victor to the ground, disarmed him, and pressed him against a steel beam. "Power without wisdom is weakness," Steven said calmly. "You were foolish to challenge me." Victor struggled, defiant even in defeat. You won't always be here," he spat. Steven's expression didn't change. "Perhaps, but tonight I am, and I will ensure you and your kind remember why arrogance is fatal." Victor's men fled in terror, leaving their leader humiliated and broken. Steven released Victor, letting him crawl away, and stepped out into the night. The city's balance was restored once again. Word spread. Gangs whispered tales of the man who could dismantle an entire operation without breaking a sweat. Witnesses described movements that seemed impossible, strikes delivered with surgical precision, and a calmness that was almost inhuman. Steven Seagal had become more than a man. He was a force, a predator that roamed the streets, enforcing his own code of justice. The city, once chaotic, now held a tense respect for him. Raul had vanished entirely. Hector remained in hiding. Victor and his men would not forget. And anyone foolish enough to challenge the predator would face a swift and absolute lesson. Steven's work was far from over. Danger never truly vanished. There would always be those who believed they could test him, challenge him, or provoke him. But he welcomed it. Because the predator thrives not in peace, but in the hunt. And Steven Seagal continued to watch, move, and strike, silent, unrelenting, unstoppable. The city knew this truth now. Cross him, and you awaken a predator. Months passed, and Los Angeles had settled into an uneasy peace. Gangs no longer operated with impunity. Whispers of Steven Seagal haunted every shadowy corner. The predator's legend grew with each encounter, his reputation spreading beyond the city to criminals across the country. Yet, Steven remained vigilant. Danger never truly sleeps, and the predator never lowers his guard. One evening, he received intelligence that a cartel from Mexico had sent operatives to the city, planning to expand their territory into Los Angeles. These were seasoned killers, armed and ruthless, unafraid of street legends. Steven arrived at the docks where the cartel was rumored to be meeting. The warehouse loomed silently, dim lights flickering, shadows of men moving inside. He entered quietly, scanning the area with practiced precision. A guard appeared, knife in hand. Before the man could react, Steven moved, disarming him in a fluid motion, twisting the wrist, and sending him sprawling into a crate. Another fired a gun. The bullet missed by inches as Steven closed the distance, neutralizing the threat with a strike to the chest that left the man unconscious. The cartel members, realizing they were under attack, scrambled, firing blindly, throwing knives, and trying to coordinate. Steven moved through them like a ghost, anticipating every strike, turning their aggression against them. Within moments, the warehouse was filled with chaos, men writhing in pain, groaning, or fleeing, weapons scattered. Their leader, a ruthless man known as Eduardo the Viper Morales, stepped forward, gun drawn. "You're just one man," he spat. "You can't stop us all." Steven's gaze didn't waver. "Calm, unrelenting. One man is all it takes," he said. "And you have already learned that lesson." They clashed. Eduardo was fast, trained, experienced, but Steven was a predator. Every strike was countered, every movement anticipated. A knife was caught midair, a gun twisted from his hand. A kick sent him sprawling across the floor. The fight was over almost as soon as it began. Eduardo lay on the ground, defeated, breathing heavily, staring up at the man who had dismantled his operation alone. "Remember this night," Steven said, his voice quiet but deadly. "This is what happens when you underestimate a predator." As the sun began to rise over the harbor, Steven walked out, leaving the cartel members unconscious or fleeing. His message was clear: Los Angeles had a guardian, a predator who would strike without hesitation, teaching anyone foolish enough to challenge him the cost of arrogance. Word traveled fast. From street gangs to cartel operatives, the predator's reputation was now global. And yet, Steven never sought recognition, never boasted, never claimed victory. He simply existed, watchful, prepared, and lethal. In the days that followed, the city remained calm, gangs operating in shadows, wary, careful, respectful. And Steven? He continued to move quietly through the streets, a silent sentinel. The predator watches, always ready, always patient, always one step ahead. And this is why the streets of Los Angeles and the criminal underworld will never forget the night Steven Seagal reminded them: cross him, and you awaken a predator.